Hey there guys, welcome to lesson number 16 of my series Tutorial Tuesdays, Beginner to Pro. We're going to continue with our eye project today, and as I said at the end of last lesson, I'm just going to start developing a little bit more value in this top of the eyelid area here. I've started to do a little bit of the detailing with the Mono Zero eraser. So what we're going to focus on today is we're going to start bringing in some of this value around the bottom of the eye here, and working on a few of these creases, and then hopefully starting to get into some of the lighter hair around that area there. I hope you've all got on pretty well with the lessons so far up to this stage. I've had some brilliant comments, and it's been really great looking at some of your eyes over on the Facebook page. If this is your first time visiting my channel, thank you so much for clicking on that video. This is lesson 16, like I say, so we are quite a way into it. If you're new to drawing, I really would advise going back and having a look at lessons 1 to obviously 15, and I take you through some of the basics, some of the things that I'm going to talk about in terms of the structure of things and contrast and tapered strokes. Might be a little bit overwhelming to start with, but by all means give this a go. But I really would suggest going and having a look at some of those earlier lessons if you haven't already done so. So for those of you that have been with me from the start, I'm just starting to fill some of this area in with my 2H pencil. I'm just conditioning the paper to start with. I'm getting some of the value down into the deeper recesses in the tooth of the paper. For those of you that are new to drawing, paper has a tooth, and what we mean by a tooth is it's not a completely flat surface. Now what we want to try and do is we want to try and build the value up so that our graphite starts to fill into the sort of the pits of the paper, and as we do that, as we move up through our pencils, going from a 2H to an HB into the B pencils, what we're going to have is we're going to have a lovely rich value, and we're going to be able to take value out in the lighter areas, giving our details such as the very small hairs and areas that are hitting, the light's hitting it, and we're also going to be able to, as we fill the tooth of the paper up, we're going to avoid something called graphite shine, which we've spoken a little bit about on the group. Because graphite has a very sort of smooth texture, the particles that come off of the pencil, it's very smooth, and they lay very flat. They actually become quite reflective, and that's why in the technique that I'm teaching you, we don't use blending stumps, we don't use anything to actually smudge the graphite with, which you will see an awful lot of artists doing. I just like to have complete control over what I'm doing, but also have the ability to keep the graphite shine down to an absolute minimum. We did have a conversation a week or so ago over on the Facebook group. There was a few people that had purchased some of the Lumograph pencils, which are sort of a charcoal, and they don't have anywhere near or any graphite shine. That's because they are more of a charcoaly texture, and the thing with charcoal is it's very, very dark, but the actual particles that come off of the pencil itself, or the charcoal, are much rougher, and what that means is it's going to give you less of a reflective surface. So I'm just going to start working into these little creases here, and looking at my reference image, I can see that the light is hitting on this bottom side of the crease, so I'm going to make sure that I recreate that. I'm going to start with this slightly deeper crease here. Now we don't want to go too dark with these, and we certainly don't want a line to represent the crease, because what that's going to then look like, it's going to look like it's cracked, and I don't want anything to look like a crack unless it is a crack, and I can see that this isn't. What we've got here is we've got a recess and it comes out and over, and we can see that because this is dark and this is lighter here, in the same way that we had there. So I'm just starting off with the 2H pencil in those areas, tapering my stroke, which means I'm hitting the paper and then taking the pencil off again. Obviously under the video that you're watching, or under the camera that I'm filming this on, it might look as though what I'm doing is I'm scribbling up and down, but I'm not. What I'm doing is I'm pulling towards myself, taking the pencil off of the paper, and then I'm pulling towards myself again. And this method of building up hundreds and hundreds of these strokes is what gives us that base to then work with and to mould the structure, giving ourselves a really rich value. It does take a little bit more time. Patience is absolutely the key to this. I can see we've got quite a dark shadow under this area there. We've got obviously some eyelashes that are going to go in there slightly later on, but I'm just going to start mapping that shadowed area out, that darker area, again just with this 2H pencil. Now you will hear me reiterating lots of points and going over them a lot, and one of the points that I think is very, very important is I always tend to work from the dark to the light areas. So I'm going to find the darkest areas with my lighter pencils, and then I'm going to gradually build out and fade out towards the lighter area. So I'm actually coming into this shadow here. I can see that this is the darkest point, and I'm going to gradually fade out towards the lighter area going in towards the eyeball. But also we've got this as well. We've got this overhang almost there. So starting in the darkest area, which is closer towards the bottom of the page here, and just gradually fading towards the lighter area. And we're going to see that this line is coming, it's not quite halfway, it's not towards the centre of the pupil, we're just a little bit off, so I'm still a way off there at the minute. And it's these little things that we're training our eye to see, which is then going to allow us to draw more freehand work in the future. Having a look to see what lines up with what. Training our eyes to almost measure. So I'm almost there now. I'm just checking roughly where we are with that. So I'm going to come in with some HB now. I've made sure that I've sharpened all of my pencils before I've started today. I think there's a bit of a checklist that we need to do before we start. It's certainly something that I would definitely do if I'm working on a commission for somebody. First thing is, let's wash our hands. I've ruined many a picture by not washing our hands and getting some oil or grease or remnants of a hand cream or something like that. So we're going to wash our hands first. I always make sure that I just give my pencils a quick sharpen, and I also take my kneaded eraser and roll it into a nice ball, just freshen that up, and just make sure that I've got my light coming in from the left hand side. So I'm right-handed, and the reason we want that is if the light is coming in from the left hand side, you can see the shadow of the pencil is going away from where I'm working. If I was left-handed, I'd need the light on the right hand side of me, so that we get that same effect, so that what we're not doing is we're not working into the shadow, into the darker areas. So I'm just being mindful of this lighter area here. This is much darker than it is up here, so I'm going to make sure that I'm recreating that as I draw. I'm just going to add a little bit of HB into this crease that's just sitting underneath that main shadowed area. One other thing that you will notice if this is one of the first videos that you've watched is actually how I'm holding the pencil. So I'm not holding it very close to the point of the pencil here and bearing down on it. What I want to come much further back, sort of halfway from the pencil end to the point, and that's going to give me a much more free-flowing stroke. I don't want to damage the tooth of the paper. I know we've spoken already about the tooth of the paper, but if I bear down too hard and I flatten the paper down, I'm going to find that very difficult, almost impossible, to remove the graphite from that, which then limits me as to what I can and can't do. Okay, I'm going to come back in now with my 2H pencil, and I'm just going to gently start to cover that area again, and again working up to that lighter point, the apex of this curve. And it's looking for these opportunities when we're drawing to get as much curve and make things rounded, or have opportunities at making things what we call clean edges. So a clean edge is where one object overlaps another. So we can see that this eyeball is going underneath here. Now obviously we understand that because we've spent our lifetime looking at other human beings, and we understand that that's where the eyeball goes in towards the skin, in towards the upper cheek. But if it's something that we're not familiar with, we want to give the viewer's brain as easy a task as possible as actually working out what it's looking at. And by doing that, we lull the viewer into a sense of what they're looking at as being real. And it's very, very easy to get these subtle things wrong. And I'm sure you've done it time and time again. You might have done it with your own work. You may have looked at somebody else's work and you can't quite tell what's off with it, but there's definitely something off with it. And you'll have noticed that I've just turned the paper slightly there. One of the absolute key and fundamental principles to being able to master this technique, and I guess any drawing technique really, is turn the paper. Don't give yourself funny angles to work at and making life uncomfortable for yourself. So for me, my best stroke is pulling towards me. It's my most consistent stroke, and it's one that I feel I can recreate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that whatever I'm trying to cover, I'm giving myself the opportunity to do that with my best stroke. So if I have to turn the paper, then I'm absolutely going to do that. And we're just constantly layering. We're just building this value up with the harder pencils to begin with. We're not going straight in with a 2B pencil or a 4B pencil. We're gradually building up. So I can see here again that this has a curve to it. So it's the light is not hitting this area as much as it's hitting this. It might be quite difficult for you to see on the screen, but if you look at your reference, this is a lighter area, exactly the same as this, and that is all we're doing. We're showing how light is falling on this object, and it doesn't matter whether it's an eye, a football, a tennis ball, a dog's face. Every single thing that we look at in nature, light is going to be reacting to it in a specific set of ways. And that's what we learn from the moment that we're born. and we open our eyes, we're perceiving how light is reacting. Things that are lighter are closer to us, with the exception of clouds. And we will do some cloud drawing in the future, definitely, because they're a lot of fun to do. We don't have to be too rigid with what we're doing. But if you actually go and take a look at some clouds, particularly nice white fluffy clouds that you see on a quite a bright day, if you think about the rule that I've just told you, that things that are further away or further back tend to be darker than things that are in front, go and have a look at some clouds on a sunny day, and what you'll sometimes notice is you'll notice very light clouds set back from some of the darker clouds, and it is just one of those anomalies. I guess it's to do with the height at which the clouds are in the atmosphere, how the sun's reflecting possibly back off of clouds that are in front. I don't know for sure, maybe some of you know the reason for that, but it's one of the fascinating things that once you learn to draw and learn to appreciate how light works, you look at things in life in a very different way. You start to look for these opportunities at where's a hard edge, where's a soft edge, where's the shadow, where's the cast shadow, where's the reflected light, and things like that. And it's certainly something that I've noticed with the clouds. So I'm going to start bringing a bit of value now away from this shadow here, and I'm going to soften that edge up a little bit. If I make this line here look too harsh, I'm going to have a similar effect to this, and that's going to look like two separate parts, and we haven't got two separate parts here. What we've got is we've got an undulation under the skin. So I need to soften this edge here, and what I mean by soften this is make this edge less pronounced as it comes away, because it's not a deep crease. Like I say, it's just a slight undulation of the skin. It's really important when you're drawing portraits for somebody that you get these very fine details in, because if you place something that represents a crease in an area that really should be representing something like this, which is an inward curve, it's going to make that person's face look off. And when you hand that to the person that's commissioned you for that, they're going to say, that's not my son, or that's not my grandmother. I think one of the most important lessons I've had is when you are doing portraits for people, or you're doing something that needs to be absolutely spot on, a very lifelike representation, is come back to your drawing the next morning or the next day, leave it for a few hours and have a look. You will always spot areas that are wrong. Try turning your drawing upside down and having a look at it like that, because what happens is when we're constantly looking at a drawing, I think there's a saying, certainly that we use over here in England, that says sometimes we can't see the wood from the trees, and what that means is basically I'm sitting looking at something for so long that my brain stops interpreting it in the same way, and I can get confused and think that something's there that's not there. So turning your drawing upside down can just trick your brain into seeing things again a little bit different. And also sometimes taking a photograph with it on your phone. If you take a photograph of your image, have a look at it through the phone screen, you do quite often pick up things that you hadn't spotted. So what I'm doing as I'm drawing this now is I'm constantly flicking my eyes back from the reference back over towards my drawing, and you start to develop a skill for understanding when you've got something in the wrong place, or you've not developed an area as much. So one of the only things that I do use to move some of the graphite around is I use this very soft brush. You can use a makeup brush, and that just allows me to move some of the graphite around a little bit and still have the control and still have those very subtle value changes that I've been building up without bearing down into the graphite. So I would advise you having a go with a very soft brush and just lightly brushing it. You don't need to bear down too much. So again, I've gone onto my HB pencil again now, and I'm just starting to build up a little bit more contrast in this shadowed area. I do need some value in here because if you look closely at the reference image, we've got these very fine hairs. Now if I haven't got any value down on the page or on the paper, I'm going to find that impossible to take any value out to represent those hairs. And I want those hairs in there because it's those small details that take your drawing from something that people look at and say, hey, that's a nice drawing, or one that people go, wow, I can't believe that that's a drawing. You know, from a distance it looks like a photograph, and that's what we want. So I'm building some value up again, making sure I'm following the reference. It's darker towards the crease than it is in the centre between the two. I'm going to bring some value down below this in a second with the 2H. That's the same principle that we're going to go through every time we draw anything. Fingers, toes, a chin, a cheek. Where's the light struggling to hit? That's the darker part. What's furthest away from the light? What's closest to the light? Where's the highlight? I talk about contrast an awful lot. You've probably heard me say it 1,000 times already in these 15, 16 videos. But that's the key for me to realism. Identify the darkest part, the pupil, the ring around the pupil and this crease under there. And then identify the lightest areas and make sure that as you're drawing, they remain the lightest and the darkest areas. And if you go through that, you will not go too far wrong. So I'm bringing some HB down into this area now. And then I'm going to brush some of the value around. Just so that I can then start to take out some of these lighter areas with either my kneaded eraser or my mono zero eraser. I'll probably use the mono zero eraser just because I can get a little bit of a finer edge to it for those very fine details. Also being very wary that this here is the brightest area on this edge of the eyelid, and that's because again this is going to have this shape to it. It's going to be bending out, so this is lighter than it is here and here, which represents this bulging out effect. So I am going to be wary of that, and I might actually just take a little bit of value out with that. So underneath the iris, I'm just going to take out a bit of value that's just going to represent that edge of the eye there. And it's something that you would imagine initially that's very insignificant. But it's those little opportunities that will make us pop. So that's going to be the sort of the edge of my drawing. And actually, as you look at that, that's where the eyelashes are going to come out of. You see, now that looks a little bit bright to me now, so I'm just going to brush a little bit of value in. Once I've started to get the value into this bottom half of the eye, it's going to make it much easier for me to work on a few more of the details within the iris and make sure that I've gone dark enough in places, because it's quite easy when we've worked on the details on the iris there to think that we've gone dark enough. And it's only once we start to build in the value around here, around the bottom and the top, that we really get to understand. And what I call that stage is balancing the values, and it's probably my favourite part of the drawing actually, because you find these little opportunities to make things darker here, lighter there, a tweak here, a tweak there. And that's when things really start happening. I'm going to come in with a little bit more 2H just into that lighter area. I'm just going to blend this out. It's having the 2H or even the 4H pencil is really important. It's a really important pencil to have, because you can start to blend over the entire area. Just get rid of some of those hard lines. Like I've said in previous videos, there's going to be very little on your drawing that's left white. The white of the paper is very rarely going to come through, except maybe for the whites of the eye there. And when I'm talking about the whites of the eye, I'm not actually meaning the white part here. I'm talking about the shiny part, the area that's reflecting the light source. In your drawing, that's really going to be the only part that is left completely white. Everything else is going to have some value in there. So I'm going to bring just some value down now from the edge of this crease, because I don't want it looking too much like like I've said a few times now, a crack or a crevice. I'm just going to start pulling some value now away and down away from that. I'm not drawing lines. I don't want any lines anywhere. There's no lines on a human face. The nose is not outlined. The lips are not outlined. Everything that we're trying to draw is going to have this. And if you go back to lesson 1, where we were drawing the patches and we were taking each of the pencils and trying to take each pencil from a very light area, or very dark to begin with, I guess, into a very light patch and almost fading out to nothing. That's exactly what we're doing here. I think I'm going to give that another brush just to start moving a little bit around. Let's have a look how we're looking. So just turning it around. So yeah, I'm quite happy with that. I'm starting to get the basic structures in there now. I can see I need a lot more value in this area over to the edge of the eye. So I'm going to start building that up now with the HB pencil. Surprising how much graphite you will have moved around just with the brush. So again, what this is going to do, it's going to stop us having this very grainy look to our drawing, where we've not quite filled those deeper recesses. And the white starts to shine through. And just make sure that I do keep reinforcing those darker parts of the creases, because I don't want to lose those. It's very easy when we're building the values up. It's very easy to lose sight of where our creases are. And again, if you're drawing for somebody and this is their child's face or their partner's face that they've been looking at for years, it's very easy to get a crease or a wrinkle in the wrong place, have it the wrong size. All of a sudden you've got something that doesn't quite look right. Something that, unless they're quite confident people and they're not too worried about hurting your feelings, a lot of people won't tell you. There's a lot of artists that don't really show their work until it's done. I'm not like that. I like to give them updates, show them where we are with certain things, because if they want to make a correction, I'd love them to tell me while I can still make a correction easily, rather than leaving it till the very end and either not saying anything and never asking me for any work again, or telling me right at the end, actually this doesn't look right, and me having to go and do large portions of the drawing again. So just bear that in mind if you are doing commissions. Like I say, I know artists that won't show them anything until the end, till they've completed the drawing. So once I've got enough value in this area, I will have another brush and then just start to take some of the details out with my eraser, just some of those highlighted areas there. Now you see, I might just go for a little bit of 2B in this crease here, just I can always remove some if I feel I've gone too dark. That's the beauty with this method, and also taking your time. Never want to start a drawing over again. In fact, I can't remember the last time I ever started a drawing over again, because I try and get things right a little bit at a time. So let's give that a slightly a slight brush again. So I need lots of value now in and around these creases just to stop them from looking like lines on a page. I'm going to build this value in and around now. That's the beauty with the tapered stroke. Because the start and finish of the stroke are tapered, which means they're thinner than the centre of the line, we're not left with patches of value that have got hard edges and harsh edges to them that we've then got to go and fill in and blend in. They run smoothly into each other, which also then makes it very easy for things like hair to be drawn. And I'm going to show you when we get on to the eyelashes that we're going to still be using this tapered stroke. If you look at a hair, it isn't just a sudden stop to it, unless it's been freshly cut, I guess. There's always a slight taper to it. I guess that the end of a pencil is a taper, isn't it? So if you look at the end of your pencil now as you're drawing, it goes down to a point, it's into a gradual point. This isn't a taper. This end here, this end is. And that's what we're really trying to recreate with our pencil strokes. We're trying to have the start and the end having those tapered edges to them. And I use that whether I'm using coloured pencil, I use it with my markers. So we can see in here, we've got one of the highlights here, one of the brightest areas. So I'm going to make sure that I leave that for now, just leave that area. I might even pull some out with the kneaded eraser. There. And just by pulling some out with the kneaded eraser initially, means that even if I do start to lay value down and it does smudge into that area, it's still going to be the lightest spot. So again, it just gives me a reference as to where I need to be with that. If I don't have that initial highlight in there, maybe leaving it blank or taking it out with the kneaded eraser, it's very easy to lose track of where I am. Just being mindful that there's an edge next to the eye there that's light, so I'm just trying to keep that from going too dark. And in itself, these little details on their own don't really add up to much, but once you've got the final drawing, it makes for a wonderful composition all over. You know, you've got the details in there, it looks wonderful. And you're really glad that you took the time just fading into the lighter areas. We're definitely going to start removing some of this value in there shortly. Just laying these lines down very close to one another. Getting this initial 2H down, and I can see that I'm going to need to go a lot darker than that, so I'm definitely going to be going into 2B territory up there in this area. I can just see from the reference image that I'm nowhere near dark enough. And although, like we've said, you don't necessarily need to go to the exact same value as the reference image, it does give you a good indication of how dark we can go. Not that we need to go that dark, as long as we've balanced the values out. As long as this is the darkest area, this is the lightest area, and everything else around it, it falls somewhere in between the two, we can still have a pretty convincing drawing, not having gone as dark. But I'm certainly going to get some more value in this area. So, I'm going to just show you how to take some of those highlights out now. I'm going to give this another final brush. And then what we're going to do is we're going to leave the rest for the next lesson. I will continue to just develop some value in and around this area, similar way to what I did with the top of the eye. So I've brushed some more value in now, and taking my Mono Zero eraser, which is this implement here, it's a mechanical eraser, it's very thin tipped. So I'm just going to have a look now at where we've got some of these highlighted areas, and I'm just going to make some of these random almost squiggles, and you can see, hopefully, I hope it's catching it, that we're just starting to remove some of those highlighted areas, and just again being mindful as to where they are. I'm not pressing on too hard. Just taking those subtle edges out, and that then creates that illusion of skin. It's a skin texture, it's the way the light's hitting the skin. I can see we've got some very fine hairs that we're going to take out and around this area. And again, what it's doing is it's building up that contrast. I can see that there's a few details in the eyeball here that I can just get the opportunity at. I'm going to take my kneaded eraser and I'm just going to take out a little bit more of a section in there. And again, because this is a skin texture, I'm not worrying too much about removing the value in a very smooth fashion. I don't mind that little bit of skin texture, actually. It does set it off quite nicely. Obviously I'm going to brush that in as well, so I will remove some of that and some of the harsher highlights, and then we repeat. So if I give that a bit of a brush, I think what you can see now is we are starting to get a nice representation of our reference image. So I'm going to sort of leave it there for you for today's lesson, guys. Continue building your values up around the lower area of this eye. You can see here we've got a very dark area which sort of corresponds to the dark area here, so we can see that the light is definitely coming from this left hand side. Continue to make sure that these creases look like creases and they don't look like cracks, and I'll look forward to seeing you post your work on the group. Thanks so much for supporting me so far, it's been a pleasure. And I'm really looking forward to seeing some of your progress, and I'll see you in the next video, guys. Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe, smack the notifications button, follow me on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter.